Welcome back to the Chronicles of the Range Monkey. I'm your host, Natalie Widener, and we're here with my personal performance coach, Chris Bean. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about coaching yourself.
The Filster Enigma is a revolutionary holster chassis system that completely divorces your holster and gun from your clothing, giving you unprecedented concealment whether in sweatpants or formal wear. It attaches to your AIWB holster via the wing and allows incredible flexibility for your concealed carry. Get yours at the link below.
All right, everybody. So I have been practicing my dry fire lately by myself, and it has been a little bit. It's been an interesting learning curve, learning how to coach myself. And so me and Chris are meeting today over a little bit of coffee to talk about that a little bit. And so I had some questions. Mainly, I'm wanting to know how to talk to myself while I'm coaching because I've always had my coach there with me. I mean, if anybody has been watching these chronicles, they know my dad is always with me at the range. So it's been a little bit weird going to, just me and my dry fire dojo. And I don't know what to do we talked a little bit about, how to note the good hits that you get, how to note the bad hits that you get. But I feel like it's almost easier to take a mental note. And I'm not sure exactly what like physical notes I should be taking. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that.
Yeah, so well, what I try and keep in my journal, and I'm pretty serious about journaling in relations to shooting because it does a couple things. One, it helps you note progression over time, so you'll be able to go back, a year from now and see where you were, understand what you were struggling with, because it's almost cyclic in nature. Someone develops skill in shooting where they experience an issue, they figure out a solve, and then over the course of time, it tends to reoccur, or a different form of it tends to reoccur, and they're not sure what they did to get over it the first time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. That's why I'm curious about it. I'm like, I feel like I've already fixed these problems and now they're sneaking back up on me, and it's because I haven't been journaling.
Sure.
So, how do I do that correctly though? Because we talked a little bit about how when you make a mistake, a notable mistake, you're supposed to make a note of it, but also I think we talked about it last time that you shouldn't spend more than a couple seconds on a mistake like that. Otherwise, that kind of works itself into your brain.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of not dwelling on the negative, right? So it's just data, favorable or non-favorable, it's just data. So really, when something that happens that isn't correct or isn't an outcome in which we're seeking, I just apply the correction. I'll articulate what that correction is and move on from it. So
Okay.
what normally happens with people before they really get their mental game up to speed is they'll get a thought in their head, well, I always present left. And that will run through their head when they're doing something. And what will inevitably happen is they will present left. And that can go a myriad of ways. So that's why I'm a big proponent of not dwelling on the negative. If something happens and you have a non-favorable repetition, apply the correction, move on to the next as a clean slate scenario. What had happened has already happened. You've applied the correction, and then you apply the correction, not dwell on what the issue was. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does. So then I'm wondering how I can track my progress if I'm not dwelling on the mistakes that I've figured out? That's kind of a weird way to word it, but
Sure. So, I mean, I can go in and give you a little blurb out of kind of my journal, just to give you an idea of kind of what I tend to put in. And so normally when I journal, I'm predominantly putting in more thoughts and feelings than like mechanical stuff. There will be mechanical things if there's something very specific I'm trying to work on. That way I have kind of a roadmap of what has happened as I'm trying to progress. But to give you an idea of an entry, this entry was 422, and it was from a live fire session. And basically this, I mean, it's a significant entry, but I'm not going to read you the whole thing.
We
Uh,
get to see Chris's diary over
yeah,
coffee
well,
today, ladies and gentlemen.
it's all about shooting. So, I mean, there's no
I
like,
mean, I expected your diary would be, Chris.
yeah, but it says ran mental program approximately 80% of the time. And C is kind of my mantra before I run a drill. That's the one word I use to kind of clue me into the kind of the shooting program to start the program in my head. Technical work was very solid and very happy with point accountability. The point accountability statement has to do with trying to be a little more meticulous with my shot groupings. I'm trying to increase accuracy while still working with speed, because that's something I've always been like a speed first shooter. So now I'm trying to be like a, you know, a point farmer and see that I can get those two things to kind of live together. Throttle back for points yielded high scores and noticed less effort equals better performance. Notes next time work on 100% mental process adherence. And then next, work on strategy to let go in clear mind of effort, allow the shooting to happen. So those are kind of the things for me, but really where I am right now, I'm almost 100% working on the mental game. I'm not
Right.
working on mechanics. So and now we could easily change that out next time, work on whatever it is. So like, let's say that you have a support hand getting late to the gun, forcing like a right hand shift when you come on target. I would say next time, need to work and focus on support hand getting to the gun sooner in the presentation and leave it at that from the journal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Because really what happens is if you wrote, let's just say you wrote down support hand always getting late on the gun. That goes back to what we were talking about with like a self-fulfilling prophecy. That will be what you dwell on, not the solution to the problem. Just that your support hand's always getting on late to the gun.
Yeah, and then it just becomes a self-identification problem.
Absolutely. It becomes part of your self-image. I don't even like using the word mistake, but for the sake of this conversation, I'll use the word mistake. The mistake becomes part of who you are. It,
Yeah.
it's no longer an outlier from a repetition or a data point. It's now embedded in who you think you perform as. So I am very, very, very careful about what I place in my journal and how I place it in there, because the journal, if nothing else, it should build your self-image into who you are trying to be. That's why we spent so much time into goals, so much time into really understanding why that was important to us, what we wanted to achieve, things like that. The journal is 100% built to foster that. Not,
Right.
yeah, not a running, you know, tab of what's keeping you from doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I've seen that self-fulfilling prophecy in myself. I've seen it in others, especially working back at the gun range. I saw it a lot, when people pay to come in for, get 20 minutes of training, you kind of see the common ones.
Mhm.
um, I remember when I was competing in a league, we had to do 1 week. It was Battleship, and it was one-handed, and I got all of the shots with my support hand, but I didn't get any of them with my strong hand. And I dwelled on that for so, 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 so long before I started working with you a little bit and kind of trying to get over some of those mental blocks that I was facing at the beginning. And now, if I have a bad day like that, I'm like, oh, I need to work on shooting
Yeah,
with or shooting one handed.
I mean, that's an interesting point of note. So if we just continue framing this stuff in shooting, right? So say someone is in a class and has a particularly difficult performance. That performance gets so embedded in the way they think, and they'll work and work and work and work, but there's this ceiling that gets created from it because that negative framing gets stuck in their head. So it's either I will do what I can to avoid that embarrassment, or I won't try. I will never try anything new again because I don't want to fail. I don't want to feel what that felt like. I don't want anyone to judge me, and they'll never get good.
Yeah, it's not until you lean into that discomfort a little bit that you
Yeah,
actually find the growth. Yeah.
yeah.
And
And
actually, I have set up a little note card in a place in my in a place in my bedroom that I see every single day that has my 3 personal goals on it, and I am starting to hit them. And it's just
huh,
crazy what
weird
keeping
how that
stuff
happens.
written down does.
Yeah, it's weird. Like I'm a big proponent, and I cannot tell you how many times it's the same thing about trying to get people to dry fire. When I talk to people about journaling or keeping tabs, however you want to do it, you'll get the myriad of excuses. I don't have time. That's corny. That's some hippie stuff. Well, whatever. But when you put pen to paper and you make your ideas real, there's a commitment that happens,
Mm.
and it tends to work, especially if you start framing it as goal setting, tracking, performance or progress to goal. It builds into who you are, and it almost always, if someone commits to it, turns into discipline. And once it turns into discipline, progression is the natural effect. So the stuff when we initially talked about goals and what someone's commitment is to set goal, what their time commitment is, things like that, where it almost gets to the point now, like for my dry fire, where I don't feel right if I don't do it. It's literally become part of who I am. So if I don't, even if it's 5 minutes, if I do not go and do that function, I don't want to say guilt. Guilt's not the right word, but I
No,
don't
but I mean,
feel
it's
good.
like that old saying that if I don't dry fire for a day, then I notice. If I don't dry fire for 2 days, my wife notices. And if I don't
Yeah,
dry fire for 3 days, the world notices.
right,
It's just falling out of those habits. So,
right. So to go back to what we were talking about before, again, I would very much not dwell on any kind of negativity. The negatives you immediately correct without inputting any kind of self-deprecating thought into it. Like, oh well, that just represents who I am, or that's I always do that. Don't do that
yep,
ever.
BS.
Um, yeah, and then really just track what went well. I think we briefly talked about this kind of off camera, but if you ever catch anyone shooting a drill or do anything and they immediately come off the line, you're like, hey, how did that go? Think
Oh,
honestly.
good, but I did this and this and
Yeah,
this
but I did
wrong.
this, and this wrong. So you're constantly falling back on like the negative aspect of a performance instead of celebrating the positive aspect of the performance. And if you recognize or put more effort into the positive aspect of the performance, you are more likely to perform positively again. And the same holds true if you stick on the negative side. If you're like, man, all my bill drills are always 2.7. Well, your bill drills will continue to be 2.7 until you change the way you think. I don't know
Exactly.
how much work you put into it because it's not a physical thing, it's a mental thing.
All right. Well, I really appreciate all your thoughts on that. And you guys can tune in next week while we keep talking about this a little bit over coffee with Chris. So thanks, Chris. It was great. See you later.
Yep, next time.